Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming. We have Dr. Ballard as our guest speaker today. Applause. Dr. Ballard leads scientific and strategic initiatives focusing on climate change's impact on wildlife, particularly in the southern ocean ecosystems with Adélie penguins, with a PhD in biological sciences from University of Auckland and a bachelor's in English from Cornell. His expertise also includes bioinformatics. So he has a long history with Point Blue, starting as a volunteer in 1991, but I'll let him introduce himself more in his presentation. So let's welcome him again.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I got the invitation while I was in the field at Cape Crozier in Antarctica. That was fun. It was like sort of random that I was checking my messages and I saw this one come in and I was like, okay, I'll do that. That sounds fun. So I'm here a couple months later in a very different scene. It's great to be here. So I'm going to talk about mostly about Adélie penguins and the work we do in the Ross Sea, but I'll talk about a few other things, and hopefully we'll have plenty of time to get into your questions at the end. So a little bit about Point Blue. It's a nonprofit conservation science organization, been around for 60 years. This is our 60th birthday. Actually, it was yesterday. So we're celebrating, and we've been working in Antarctica since 1972. Not every single year, but it has been every year since 1996. And that's me at the site where I actually did most of my PhD research in that tent, or near that tent. And there's a penguin going across the weighbridge. So one of the things that was really fun for me was figuring out how to get it so that the penguins would actually do that, would actually go in and out across that bridge, and they're RFID tagged, and they get weighed, and we can tell how long they've been away, how much food they get, how they survive from year to year, things like that. So basically what Point Blue does is we do conservation science. We try to apply science, we do science, and then we try to apply it to improve conservation outcomes. And there's about 180 of us at this point. So the Ross Sea is in the Southern Ocean. It is one of the two large embayments of Antarctica, the other one being the Weddell Sea on the other side. This part here is Weddell, and this is the Ross Sea. The Ross Sea is a very unusual place on Earth for lots of reasons. It's one of the most pristine marine ecosystems, and Antarctica in general is pretty pristine. And that's mostly because it's so far away from where people go usually, so there's not many people going there. And there's a lot of ice there a lot of the time, so it's very difficult to get there. It's also, like all of Antarctica, isolated from the rest of the world's oceans by this thing called the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, which is a very strong current that goes clockwise around the continent. And basically, almost nothing can cross it. Whales can cross it. Some seabirds cross it, but most animals don't go across it. Most ocean at the surface doesn't go across it either. Deep water does go underneath it. So the picture is showing chlorophyll as remotely sensed from a satellite, and the bloom there, the algal bloom every year is really big, and actually there's two very well-defined algal blooms, and that is why there's a lot of krill there, and that's why there's a lot of other things there too. But there's so many seabirds and so many whales in that one area that the krill get hit pretty hard, and a lot of that bloom goes ungrazed and gets sequestered into the deep ocean. So it's a very active and prolific carbon sink, taking about the equivalent, this is a conservative estimate of 10 million cars worth of carbon off the road every year. So that's pretty neat. What's going on in Antarctica is similar to what's going on in the Arctic and everywhere else. There's ice. Basically, we're losing ice pretty quickly. And we think of it in terms of like how what's called the sea ice season, which is a really important season for the animals and the ecosystems at the poles. And that's just the period of time that the ice is forming, present, and then going away. So that sort of annual cycle. And it has changed quite a lot. And you can see that up until about 2012, when this was published, it was actually true until about 2016. We had a very similar situation in the Arctic on the left side, and in the peninsula region of Antarctica, the more northerly part of Antarctica, where the sea ice season actually reduced by 3 months, about 3 months over the course of 40 years or so, 32 years. That's a crazy change. That's like losing summer or losing winter, basically. 3 month change in a whole season, in a whole, like summer is gone, winter is gone, or something like that. And meanwhile, in the Ross Sea where I've been working, it got longer by about the same amount. So there's this balance, and a lot of sort of climate debate has used this as a, say, well, look, it's not actually getting worse, it's just changing where it is, and that kind of thing. That has changed recently, and we've had some really, really low sea ice years. All the record lows were flipped in 2016, 17, and have actually stayed low. And I'll show you the most recent data as well. But another thing to notice is that we did have this really, it's like such a big switch, and one of the things about climate change is that we are seeing this high variability in all kinds of climate signals in the last 10 to 20 years. So more recently, this is what I was saying, up until about 2015, we were actually seeing pretty strong sea ice formation and longer seasons. But then 16 onward, it started getting much shorter. So sea ice really went away pretty fast in the Antarctic, all around Antarctica, especially 16 to 19. 20 was a little bit better, but then I can't remember 21. 22, 23, and 24 were all pretty bad again. So this is the current situation. The blue is this year, just a few days ago. This is the normal low point in how much sea ice there is in Antarctica. And it's a really important time because a lot of the animals that live there depend on sea ice to some extent. So we think of this as potentially a bottleneck for those species because they have to find sea ice. Some of them need sea ice to get out of the water to molt or to get away from predators and things like that. So this point is of concern, and you can see, I just included, I mean, this is the mean or the median or something, and then, this is the record low year, which was what, 2023, and then we have 2024, 25, 24, and 25 there. So yeah, not good. Okay, so Adélies are sea ice obligates. There's only 2 species of penguin that really need ice, and that's the emperors and Adélies. Most other penguins avoid ice. So these ideas that like penguins need ice, it's like really based on those 2 species. And Adélies actually need a little bit less than emperors. Emperors do everything on ice. They lay their eggs and keep their chicks on their feet on ice. They don't ever have to go on land. But Adélies actually nest on land. So they need both ice-free land and icy water, both together. So they have this Goldilocks situation that they need. And we are working on this island, Ross Island, which is shown where it is in the star there. It's about 75 kilometers across, and we're studying really intensively these 2 penguin colonies that have really different characteristics in terms of their size and their population trajectories. So one of the interesting things about Adélies is that they're colonial seabirds. A lot of seabirds are colonial, most of them are. And if you're an Adélie penguin, the chances are that you live in a really big colony, even though there aren't very many big colonies. There's only a few places in Antarctica that support such large colonies, more than 100,000 pairs of birds. Most of the colonies that exist are fewer than that. So most Adélie penguins have fewer than 5,000 breeding pairs, but most Adélies live in colonies that have more than 50,000 pairs. Why is that? What's going on with that? Are there specific mechanisms that drive that? Those are some of the questions that we've been trying to figure out answers to. We also know that the colonies that are in the Ross Sea region, where it was doing pretty well with the ice, they've been expanding, whereas populations where the sea ice was going away, the penguins were also going away. So if you go, I was actually over there last year, a little bit more than a year ago, and I didn't see a single Adélie penguin the whole time I was there. It was really weird for me to be in Antarctica and not see Adélie penguins. I also didn't see any sea ice, like none. So that was different for me. I mean, where I work, there's still a lot of sea ice generally. So also this species have been around probably, certainly at least 2 million years. The last common ancestor for these guys is something like 8 million years. So somewhere between 8 million and 2 million years ago, they split, became their own thing, and started occupying the habitat that they occupy. Somehow they've made it through that 2 million years. So there have been big changes in the past, which we know. It's another interesting thing about working in Antarctica. The historical record, the geological record, is very well preserved in Antarctica, so that's pretty neat. So there's a lot. That's a deep thing to go into if you guys are interested in that kind of stuff. So in other words, you can track where the glaciers were, where the penguins were, what they were eating over a course of at least 50,000 years, if not longer. Some people are starting to push it back further than that. So what we're worried about is that, like, from a conservation perspective, they're undergoing changes. They're facing environmental changes faster than they've ever had to in their entire existence, which is probably a common theme in your class. There's a penguin going across the bridge. This is like one of the ways we study them. We attach a lot of biologgers, different kinds of biologgers. We did one study where we had these like time depth recorders, these tiny time depth recorders on the same penguins that are going in and out, so we can actually learn from their dive profiles when they're catching fish or krill and how much they can catch, and then like correlating that with how much food is coming into the chicks. We use UAVs a lot these days. We also use sea gliders. We're using all kinds of technology to study the environment. Another thing that I really get into is having the animals be our sensors, essentially, because they go all kinds of places that we can't go when the conditions are terrible, where ships can't go, where submarines can't go. Penguins can still be there, and they're also showing us where they want to be, not just like random stuff, but like they're going to places with purpose. So so that's I think a really neat aspect of the work. We also just take field notes a lot. We use a Grinnellian journal approach. I walked in on Grinnell Way over there, I think, somewhere. So I got here today, that was cool. But literally we use I think it's still taught here, Grinnellian journaling. You guys do that at all? Anybody? Field biology? Anyway, it's basically it's a style of keeping a field notebook that he developed. So I'm gonna talk about the study sites. Basically, there's a lot of the world's population of Adélie penguins is in this region. We also work at another location called Cape Bird, and we partner with New Zealand on that. And so the cool thing about this place is that you have this full range of the sizes of colonies. A relatively small one, medium-sized one, and a really big one. So we're like, okay, so we can study all three of them at the same time and try to understand why they're changing in different ways. And the trajectories are different. So at Cape Crozier, it's been increasing quite a lot. It grew. In fact, we thought it was at its maximum size here because we measured the energetics using doubly labeled water, and they were using so much energy. It was more than any animal had ever been measured to use before. So we're like, okay, they're maxing out. They're working as hard as they can because they're in competition with so many other penguins. That's what limits their size. But then it doubled in size or more after that. So we're like, okay, we don't understand anything. And Cape Royds just stays the same size basically all the time. And it's not that there's not enough room for them. There's plenty of room for the colony to grow. So that has been something that we've been trying to puzzle out. So we have all kinds of theories about this, and I'll talk a little bit about why, what some of the ideas are. So obviously I said there were sea ice obligates. Why do they need ice? Like, what does it do? And if there's not very much ice, I told you that some of those penguin populations are disappearing. Where there's been lots of icy populations are doing pretty well. But why? Like, what is it that they need the ice for? And one of the things that they need it for, or at least we think they need it for, is molt. So every year, all birds need to change all their feathers, and they do it in different ways. So this is another thing that you could totally geek out on, because like different birds do this in really different ways, and the evolution of that is really neat. Seabirds in general do what's called catastrophic molt. Some people don't like that because it sounds terrible. It's like they do all their feathers at the same time. That's one strategy. It's not a great strategy if you have predators and you need to fly away from them. But penguins don't have a lot of predators on the ice. There's like nothing there. There's no, remember, there's no polar bears in Antarctica, right? So like, the only thing they have to worry about, well, I'll tell you what you have to worry about later. There are things they have to worry about in the water, but not on the ice. So it's a very safe place for them to be. So a lot of them molt on ice. Some of them molt on land, but like why? Why do some of them molt on land? Why do most of them molt on ice? So we started getting into this, and we did some biologging, and we tracked like what kind of, let's see, okay. Yeah, we tracked where they went, and it's really hard to figure out where they're going because they're leaving the colony, they're going out into this like really hostile environment that we don't have boats. There are occasionally ships that we can use, but ships are really expensive, like minimum $75,000 a day. So it's not easy to do that. So these trackers are really cool. The only problem with them is you have to get them back again. So like you put them on, they're like a little Fitbit thing, and we actually had to, a lot of the work is like custom designing these kinds of things so that they'll work on the animal that you're working with. So we had to like spend a lot of time figuring out what would fit exactly right for an Adélie penguin on its ankle. Then you have to get it back a year later and hope that it's still working, which they don't always work right here. And then you download them. And we got 195 back over 3 years, so that's pretty good. A little bit more about feathers. So feathers, especially for an animal that's spending most of its life in the water, in freezing cold water, are pretty important, and they have to be able to insulate, but also be waterproof. So they have two different layers, or three actually, but an external is more like water resistant, and the internal one is more downy and warm. And if their feathers are not high quality, they get wet and cold, and they have to get out of the water more often, or they die. But if they have really good feather quality, they can do what normal penguins do, which is swim around most of the time underwater, and that's interesting. If their feathers are dirty at all, they clean them. That's the first priority. Get your feathers clean. So it's kind of funny because they are very dirty when they leave the colony and they go in the water, and the first thing they do is just clean up for a good half hour or so. Okay, we talked about that already. So it takes them. Turns out it takes 19 days to replace all your feathers if you're an Adélie penguin on average. Almost, and it's very consistent. You can't go in the water when you're molting. So you gotta have enough food in you to last that 19-day period, grow all those feathers, and then you're gonna be pretty hungry when you get back in. So we think of this as potentially a bottleneck in the time that they really have to, they all have to do this, and they all have to do it at the same time, and they have to not eat for that period of time. So makes sense that it could be a problem for them. So based on what we knew before, we hypothesized that there are these areas of persistent high ice concentration would be important for them, and that if that they would find places where there's been consistently a lot of ice during the time period that they molt. And we also thought that maybe if there's declines in that amount of ice, or some years where there's low ice availability, that might correlate with lower return rates of adult penguins, lower survival of adult penguins. Okay, so we estimated the dive timing, the molt timing based on their dive records, so they're not in the water when they're molting, so that was pretty neat. And this is the first time that it was really well documented exactly when they're molting, and also where they're molting. And we found that basically there's an eastern and a western molting area, and by far most of them molt in the east. So most of what I'll talk about is based on the east, although it turns out that if you molt in the west, you're a male, which was really weird, and we don't know why that is. But males and females in the east, but only males in the west. So there's something going on with that we haven't gotten into yet. And that was one of those things where we were just like, really? Okay. I have no idea what that would be. The ice concentration over time, this is using the whole, the whole record from the satellite era, is basically, yes, there's a lot of ice in that area. This is a year of relatively high sea ice concentration, 2003. And then the years more recently, this was over what year was this? 2019. It's like much lower sea ice, obviously almost none in the really high core area. So this other line is the Ross Sea Marine Protected Area, which is a very large, it's the largest marine protected area in the world. And we helped to design that, those lines before we knew where the penguins molted, and it actually includes a lot of the penguin molt areas, so that's pretty cool. Okay, so what else did we learn? We did learn that there was a correlation between the return rates of the adults and the sea ice, so it did turn out that yes, when there's less sea ice, that's not good for adult survival. And we found these two areas where they're really more likely to be. That other area, this other line is the whole area of use by the adult penguins throughout their whole year. And then we started more recently. This is data from just the other day. We have penguins out there right now with biologgers on them. These are different kinds of biologgers, and this is the sea ice from 3 days ago or 5 days ago. These are all adults molting in the ice. And what's interesting is that, again, you have very few over here, but they're molting further south than they did before, 5 years ago. I don't know if that, could be just a coincidence, but it's different. So the eastern molt is still happening, or the western molt is different. The one on the right is chicks from this year. And I'm going to talk more about chicks in a minute, but you can see all the green ones are chicks that are still transmitting data, and those mostly are in the ice. And the ones that are not still transmitting data are not in the ice. The adults that are not transmitting data, they molted already. They dropped their tags, so those tags are not transmitting. But anyway, I think that's an interesting result for this year. Okay, so I'm going to. So the long-term trend in the sea ice for the western molt area is not so bad, but it's actually increasing. But in the east, there's been this decline, which is concerning. I'm gonna skip through this a little bit. This is the return rate that I was talking about. So there's definitely, it's a pretty strong fit. Now in ecology, like an R-square of 29 is, I think that's pretty exciting for us. But then you show that to like a physicist or something, and they're like, what are you talking about? You don't know anything. And that's the constant frustration with ecology. But we were pretty thrilled to get this actually, because it was like, we made the prediction, we did the hypothesis test, and look at that. But then of course it's bad news. Penguins need ice to survive, unless they can figure out how to change where they molt. So this is now what I'm more interested in. It's like, are they gonna change? Are they gonna adapt? Are they gonna they can molt on land, so maybe they'll start molting on land. Or maybe they'll find sea ice somewhere else, although there's not a lot of options in a lot of years these days. So that all made sense, except that the Cape Crozier population has been growing. So if this is such a sad story and the sea ice is going away, how is it possible that colony is growing? And it was growing, but it actually stopped growing in 2020. So 21 and 22, and actually all the way up to this year, it had reached a high point in 2020 and then declined 15% per year after that. And then this year was actually a little bit of an increase, about 9% increase over last year. So it dropped and then it's sort of maybe stabilized now. So maybe they are responding to this. All right, this was 23. So there's a lot of really cool visualizations on the internet about changes in sea ice over long periods of time. In 2022, it was the lowest that had ever been observed at that point. Then it was the lowest again in 23, and then again in 24. And we only have satellite data going back to 1979, which might seem like a long time, but when you start working with this, you realize that's not very long at all. So we just have this relatively narrow window that we're looking at. But It's better than nothing. Yeah, so you can see the molt, this is the eastern molt area, and you can see that that's, there's not much ice in there. Okay, so this is all published in a paper in PNAS, which you can read if you want. And I'll move on to the next thing. So I'm going to switch gears and talk about the fledglings. Nobody had ever studied fledglings before. There's like, it's pretty fun to work with them. They're goofy. They're just they don't know what's going on. They like run all over the place and kind of bounce off things. And they have crazy hairdos also. And again, we're really interested in, same kinds of things, like what's going on with them, what might their relationship to ice be, and climate change factors. So when I try to teach, young biologists to not just get all into the data and not just get into like the technology or the analysis, but also just like use your bioempathy, use your ability to like look at something and try to understand what's happening with it. And so what do you think's going on with this penguin from that picture? Does it look like it's happy, or does it look like it's confident?
He looks a little scared.
Yeah, he looks terrified. And he's got reason to be terrified. It's awkward going in the water when you have that much down and you don't know how to swim. Like, this is the first time that he just went in, so you can't dive. Like, just figuring this out. Don't even really understand what the water is. Again, we're trying to understand this general pattern, and one of the things that hadn't been done at all is like to look at the role of chicks. And we had previously hypothesized that there's probably this disparate amount of food left at the end of the breeding season. The large colony at Cape Crozier, this is where the adults went to find food to feed their chicks. The tiny colony at Cape Royds, that's where they went to find the food for their chicks. And this is combining data from like 15 years or something. And then Cape Fur, the medium-sized colony. So the foraging halos or areas of these penguin colonies are directly correlated with the size of the breeding population. And this is a thing called Ashmo's halo. It's like, pretty old school ecology stuff. So we've proven that that is the case here. But if you're a penguin chick fledging from here after this happened, what do you do? Like, when it's not, there's no food left. If you're here, this could be okay. You don't have to go very far as a penguin chick. You don't have to know how to swim that well, maybe, to get into some food. So maybe there's like higher like mortality of Adélie's chicks at Crozier. However, that colony is like growing like crazy, right? So how could that be if the chicks are all dying? So that's what we thought might be happening, but we knew we would be surprised by the answer. They die like crazy. This is one of the reasons people don't study them very much, is because you can't, like, you're probably studying something that's about to die. So it's really a bummer. And if you attach something expensive to it, you're not gonna get it back. And it's probably not gonna collect very much data for you. So previous studies, there's not been much done on it, but basically people are like, well, they're either starving or they're getting eaten. And recently there was an estimate of 47% survival. I think that's really, really optimistic. Like, I think they just got it in a good year or something. And that the way they did that was also a little bit, it was a model result, not a direct observation. So okay, so this is what it looked like when they're fledging. But that's working too. You told me that wasn't gonna work. So they're just ridiculous, right? They're like running away from the water. They're following the adults in, and then when they get to the water, it's like kids, right? Like, just run away from it. And they do that for hours and hours and hours, and sometimes days and days and days. So it's really frustrating. There was another study where they lost 73% of the tags that they put out in the first 16 days. So they're not sure if they all died or if the tags fell off or the tags failed or whatever. But designing a tag that would work for this circumstance so it has to stay on the penguin chick, not kill the penguin chick, and collect all the data and transmit the data. It's kind of epic, actually. I think we talked about, we ended up doing it on the Palmer side too, so we had data from the peninsula as well. So like we were responding to COVID. We couldn't do the work 1 year in the Ross Sea, so we ended up doing it over there because we had somebody who was going there. Anyway, ecology is messy sometimes. This is the tags, the first generation of the tag that we designed. We co-developed it with some engineers at a place called CellTrack. And it's a pretty fancy tag, and the fanciest thing about it is that it doesn't have an external antenna, which doesn't seem like that fancy, but it has to be able to transmit to a satellite on a penguin that's in the water, from a penguin that's in the water, and it's transmitting a bunch of data. It's like not just like where it is, but also like all of its dive data that it's been collecting, and accelerometry data, temperature data, stuff like that. And it's got a solar panel on it, so it's recharging. And again, it has to be designed in a way that's like, not gonna kill the penguin. So you need it to be really hydrodynamic. That's what it looked like on fledgling. Again, this is like the first generation tag we've designed. We've had a couple improvements since then. They just, you wanna get it as low on the back as possible. Lots of people attach up here because that part of the body comes out of the water more, so you're more likely to get a transmission, but it also is like in there, creates a lot of drag, so we put them much lower. The longest duration deployments that we had for Crozier ended up being basically 9 months. And then we had, at Royds we had 121 days, so like 4 or 5 months, and at Humboldt Island we had 3 months. So we did pretty well in terms of the duration, but you can see that contrary to what we expected, the Crozier penguins tended to live longer, assuming that those tags weren't falling off, but we don't think they were. So it looks to me like Crozier chicks have better survival, but why would that be? We lost like 75 to 80% of our tags within 30 days instead of 15 days like the previous study, so a little bit better at Humboldt Island and Cape Royds, but in Crozier, the largest colony, only 41% were lost. So it's like twice as, the survival over that first period was twice as high almost. This is what the tracks look like. So Crozier penguins in blue took off really fast and went way out. They got out of that halo area. The Royds penguins did move more slowly and also died a lot faster. This is the daily sea ice, what it looks like. And the chicks do stay in the ice for the most part. So I think they're using that ice as a way to like get out of the water, rest, get away from predators. This one, it's actually the one that lived the longest, I think. That one out there, it went way out. It did get away from the ice. So that was interesting. And then at Humboldt Island, they stayed really close to the colony for the most part, but one of them actually made a pretty long journey over into the Weddell Sea, which was neat to see. But they mostly disappeared pretty fast. That one was quite the adventurer. Okay, and then again, this year's penguins. So the Cape Crozier penguins on the right, like I said, they're really finding the ice. The ones that are still alive found the ice. The Royds penguins did not find ice, stayed really far west, and mostly have died again much faster. And that's what's interesting is that these guys all happened really early. So there was this year a really fast die-off of the Cape Crozier chicks in the early season. And I thought, oh, it's gonna be a different pattern this year, but now it turns out that it's actually the same. It's turning out to be the same pattern that we had before. Okay, so we also get dive data from these chicks, and there's not a lot of variability in how deep they're diving. They do dive a little bit deeper at Crozier, but not, it's not statistically different. Humboldt is maybe the weird one there, it's slightly shallower. But anyway, that's what penguin chicks do. They don't dive as deep as adults. Adults dive more like 45 to 75 meters usually, and the chicks are diving less deeply. But this shows like probably where, when they're finding food. So this is like when they're making a lot of foraging dives, and we can differentiate the foraging dives by the pattern in the dive itself. Like we can get really high resolution contours of them. So these guys are finding food here. That's great. And these guys are finding food here. So it took them a little bit longer, a few weeks longer. The crozier never seems to get into that zone. Like they're just not finding that much food, but they're still alive. So it's almost like they're getting lulled into a sense of sort of security at Roy's, especially maybe Hummel too, where it's like, oh, we're finding lots of food, this is awesome. And then they get eaten by leopard seals. So there's a lot of pictures on the internet of leopard seals eating penguins, and some of leopard seals eating, or trying to eat baby penguins. So we saw a lot of leopard seals this year. And in fact, I didn't want to tag the chicks because I thought they were gonna all get eaten right away, based on what we saw the first day we were out there, but it ended up being okay, mostly. Well, we had to adjust our study design a little bit to accommodate that. This is a model that shows where all the leopard seals are from somebody else's data. And there's like where the Roy's penguins go, there's a bunch of leopard seals predicted to be also around the peninsula region. So that could be it, but there's also, in the peninsula region, there's other things eating baby penguins. This is a fur seal eating a baby Adélie, and this is a type B killer whale eating an Adélie. And most killer whale species, well, anyway, the killer whales that we have in the Ross Sea don't seem to eat penguins very much. They're called, they're type C killer whales or Ross Sea killer whales, and they seem to eat fish mostly. But anyway, they do eat penguins, type B's too. So I'm gonna wrap it up so you have time to, hopefully time, yeah, some time. But I think like, from a technological perspective and from like, we've gotten to the point where we can actually do this work on young penguins, which is exciting. It's very expensive. The tags are like $2,500 each. And so we spend, $250,000 to $300,000 on tags every year. So thankfully, the National Science Foundation has been paying for that. It's not something we're gonna be able to do forever probably, but we're in the middle of the study now. We did see very different dispersal strategies, of these from the different colonies, and it's not about the food. Crozier penguins aren't finding a lot of food when they leave the colony. They have to go a lot further to find it, and they're working a lot harder, but they're getting out of there and they're getting away from the predators. Whereas the penguins that find food close to their colonies, where there was no big halo, Asheville's halo, they find a bunch of food there, but they stay there and then they get eaten. They disappear much more quickly, we think. That's the theory. And yeah, so that might help explain like why the Cape Crozier colony is getting bigger. And it's like this weird thing to think about. It's like it's sort of circular, right? Like it's big, therefore there's this competition, therefore there's no food close, therefore the penguin chicks go further, therefore they live longer. Well, okay, is that really a stable situation? How did that come to be? I think it's pretty interesting, so we'll keep working on it. And I'll just stop there and thank the National Science Foundation for their support. And there's a lot of logistic support that goes on behind the scenes, obviously, flying us all down there and making sure that we stay safe and warm and all that. So, thank you.
Any questions?
I have two questions. The first question is, do any skuas range in those Adélie populations?
Yeah, so we have South Polar skuas on Ross Island, and they are the main predator of eggs and chicks, of young chicks. They don't eat the bigger chicks, but in the peninsula region, there are also South Polar skuas, but more brown skuas over there, which is a very closely related species.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And the second question, I read an article around 2 years ago, I think, where it discussed king crabs that were moving in. I think it was king crabs that were moving into the South Pole. And scientists were worried about whether they'll kind of destroy this food chain because a lot of the invertebrates there don't have hard shells equipped to deal with those crabs. So I was wondering if you ever like
Yeah,
noticed. like-
no, so that was, yes, there are crabs they're a new, I don't remember which species of crab, but I remember reading that article too. I don't think it was king crab, but maybe it was. Anyway, they're in the peninsula area. So all kinds of things are making their way to the peninsula, which is much warmer, very different habitat. So far, the Ross Sea is still very isolated. There's we haven't seen any kind of species invasions at all, but it would be a big deal, yeah, for sure. The benthic habitat in Antarctica is extremely rich, and it's been very safe from that kind of stuff for forever. So, yeah, it's scary.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Has it ever been documented for a penguin colony to like show different behavior during molting, like ever on land or anything in a low sea ice year?
We haven't seen them. So some penguins definitely nest on land. I mean, molt on land. Like Cape Royds, there's more. We think there might be a higher proportion molting on land there than in other colonies, but we don't know exactly. There's some that molt on land at Cape Crozier also. So it's not clear, and we just don't know. But this is one of the questions: is will they adjust in their lifetime? And what we do know, we did do repeated studies, measures of the same birds, and they tend to go back to the same place that they molted the previous year, so they don't move around a lot. They're pretty consistent about that. Now, is that like hardwired, or do they just, what are they gonna do if they show up and there's no ice? I don't know, like, I'm not sure. That's one, yeah, I think that's really interesting.
I'm just wondering, like, how long do the chicks like stay with their parents?
Not very long. So the adults are, it's basically, the chicks hatch right around Christmas time, and then they fledge about a month and a half later. So during that, between when they hatch and they fledge, so let's say 6 weeks, the parents are very much with them every day or every other day. But after that, they're gone. So that's it. They fledge and they're done. As far as we know. You never know. I mean, stranger things have happened where like they somehow would find each other, but it would be really surprising. Yeah.
So many of the predators eat the penguins that have the tags. Have you seen any of the predators that get affected by tags? I don't imagine it's edible, right?
No, right. So this is like, it's a really interesting question, and it extends also to like what about all this like garbage we're putting out there, right? And it's actually not that much, but it might sound like a lot. But the predators don't. Well, so a leopard seal will, and a fur seal, they won't eat the feathers or the skin. They just like, they tear it off. They actually like flap it around and like tear it off. They don't like to chew on the feathers and the skin, so they're not actually eating the tag. The tag would fly off of there and not end up in the animal. Killer whale, on the other hand, might swallow the whole thing. So, but it would be a relatively small impact to a killer whale, I would think. But we are interested in developing tags. So like another thing, I don't know how possible it is to develop a more sort of eco-friendly tag. You know, they have batteries, or they got epoxy all around and all this stuff like that. Like, is there a way to make them more, somehow, you know, less damaging to the environment, or less of an impact? Most of the time when we attach an instrument, we get it back again. But these we're not getting back.
How did you guys get the penguins to go through that thing to weigh them?
That took me like years to get them to do that. I mean, basically, you have to like find a spot that they're already really they do use pathways, right? So like you find a place that they're using, and then you're like, okay, I'll put the weighbridge right in the middle of that pathway, and then start growing a fence basically around their subcolony, and you don't want to lock them all in at once. I actually started from the back and sort of started bringing it closer and closer. So I was encouraging them to use that spot. And what's incredible is that I thought the chicks would never figure it out. And like, I was always like, oh, we have to take it down before the chicks are ready to run around because it'll trap them. The chicks figure it out right away. They watch the adults do it, and they're like, oh, okay, that's what we do. So I thought that was pretty cool. Also, the chicks are not afraid to just like run straight at the fence full speed. And if they do that, they actually either go under it or over. It's not that firm. It's not like a rigid, it's like a soft thing. So the adults never do it, but the chicks will just like charge it. So I think that's pretty neat. So yeah, adults and chicks are different. But anyway, yeah, it took a long time. But now it's like, and we've actually tried it in a few other places and it didn't work. So you do have to pick the right spot.
And then one quick thing.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to the Arctic and seen a polar bear?
No, no. I mean, I've been above the Arctic Circle, but I've never been on the water above the Arctic Circle. Yeah, I would love to do that. Yeah.
Is your team strictly researchers, or like what's the range of positions you guys have? Is there any like anybody documenting it for media or that kind of thing?
We do bring filmmakers and we have education folks. We have one person who that's all they do is education and outreach, and then we have done something like, I don't know, maybe 10 different films, like different like BBC or Disney. Disney did a very silly movie there. I don't know. I mean, yeah. So we encourage that, and yeah, there's been some cool products from it. Frozen Planet, we did some of the Frozen Planet stuff. Yeah.
Was there a specific connection you had in penguins before going into this project?
Not really, not more than most people. Like, I mean, I always loved penguins, but like I wasn't ever planning to be a person who studied penguins. I just got lucky. I met a person at a party actually, and I was like talking to him about it, David Ainley, and he was like telling me about it. I was like, oh, I really want to do that. And then it just worked out. So it was the timing. It was like right place, right time. Yeah.
Is there an animal you wish to study in the future?
I've started studying fish a lot recently. I'm really into fish now. So coral reef fish are another thing that I'm into. Yeah, I'm not sure which one. I mean, we have this AI now that can identify individual groupers, and Nassau groupers are a really interesting species. I think they're basically almost completely wiped out. Now they're coming back. It's almost like fishermen forgot how to fish for them, so now they're coming back. So now we have to like protect them because they taste really good. But we have this AI, we have this like coral bot that like drives around, and like when it sees a Nassau grouper, it can actually identify the individual grouper by its face, just facial recognition on it. So that's been kind of an interesting area to get into. Grace.
Yeah, building off of that real quick, I wanted to talk about the different field methods that you guys use for data collection, because you had on the screen like some drone technology, and then you also had the weighing technology. I was wondering like how new technology is like kind of affecting your different studies over the years.
Well, there's obviously rapid change in computing and AI is like really affecting everything. We're making it much faster development processes, and a lot of object recognition stuff, a lot of visual learning models now, lots of stuff that's helping us get through video data. We're putting loggers on animals, including penguins. I didn't show you the video data, but that's another whole thing. And the main problem there is then you end up with hundreds of hours of video that somebody has to look through. So now there's AIs that can actually help you find stuff. You teach it what you're looking for, and it can help you find it. So that's really rapid change there. And then autonomous vehicles of all kinds. Like I showed a glider. The gliders are amazing. Like they can go out for months at a time collecting hydroacoustic data and then recharge at the surface and then keep going. And they just keep going, and it collects so much data, and then they can transmit it on satellites. So really breakthrough. Like you don't have to have a ship anymore. There's sail drone here. It's based in Alameda, and they send. You can see them on the bay sometimes. They're pretty cool. It's like a sailing robot with cameras and all kinds of hydroacoustics on them, and those are pretty neat. They can go all around the world without recharging. So that's pretty cool, and transmit their data. So there's all kinds of stuff. UAVs are like amazing. Like they're so amazing, and they're getting better and better. So we collect a lot of data with them now too.
UAVs are a type of drone.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Okay.
flying drones. Like, yeah.
Awesome.
I was just wondering, I know you're looking at the effect of basically if things can adapt to the changing sea ice, and it's also affected by climate change. And I was wondering if you had certain goals in terms of what you'd like to see for conservation and climate change policy that you hope to use your research for.
Yeah, so I mean, I think just making people more aware is one thing. Like this is real. you know, part of it, like I've been personally watching this happen since 1996, so I'm very comfortable telling people, like, look, this is how it's changing, and this is what's happening, and this is how it's affecting animals that you might care about, you know. But also, you know, in the work in Antarctica, you're working internationally because it's, you know, it's managed by an international treaty, and that's very rewarding. There's this whole thing called science diplomacy. So as a scientist, I'm welcomed or invited to come into these conversations around policy and like how should this place be managed. So in Antarctica, it's marine protected areas like we talked about, but also managing tourism is a big deal, and there's growing tourism. So just to have a place at the table where we can say, you know, you shouldn't disturb penguins when they're molting, you should stay away from this whole area, do not bring a ship through here. Please don't like have your visitors flying drones over this area, like that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of opportunities like that. So yeah, it's you know, there's a lot of different agendas, but basically right now the main focus is 30 by 30, the United Nations decade on climate change, and like trying to get as much done together as a planet, especially given the current federal situation. It's like you need to work with California, work with international. You know, like lots of countries are doing a lot, and so that's for the next 5 years. Like that's the main thing I'm looking for, those opportunities.
Okay, we've hit 6,
We're done?
so if you
Okay.
guys want to head out, you're free to head out. But if you have any more questions, stick around, and hopefully we'll be able to.
I'll be here. Yeah, thank you.
That's right.
Thanks everyone for coming.